Our school system and culture are enabling predators to sexualize children. Landon Starbuck is an advocate who is empowering parents to fight back against the dangers of social media, family drag shows, and pornography in schools. Our children are being attacked. It's time for parents to wake up and take action. Please join us. I just think this conversation is one that all parents need to hear, and really appreciate having you come here. You know, we've been talking about the revival of motherhood and parenthood in general, and this era that we live in where there's an onslaught against our children from the culture, from the schools. And, you know, parents are aware, but they also don't know what to do. And it's frankly so scary to be a parent these days. And so just love your feedback and your advice. And I'd love the people who are watching to just hear where you come from and what you're working on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a mom, an advocate, and the founder of a nonprofit called Freedom Forever. And we combat child exploitation and trafficking in all its forms. We're different than the typical rescue raid model where the focus is to just rescue children. While that's necessary and good, we have to get to the source of the problem before the grooming starts, before they're exploited or trafficked. And that is where our work comes in with prevention-based activism, empowering parents with not just education, but inspiring them to take actions necessary so that they can intervene and be the warriors that they need to be in their kids' lives to protect them.
What is the type of work that you're doing to fight upstream? So you're not actually dealing with the kidnapping of children, but you're seeing much of the sex exploitation happening in what I would say like normal homes. I mean, this could happen anywhere. I know you were living in California, you live now in Nashville. What is it that you're seeing, and what is it that you're trying to educate people about?
Well, I think there's this notion, you know, the man in the van coming to take our children. And that is just not statistically the reality of what's happening today. The most dangerous assault on our children is the fact they're spending inordinate amounts of time online and they're being exposed to grooming devices, grooming social media, things that groom them and render them more vulnerable to exploitation online. So the majority of these crimes against children, the horrific crimes, are happening online. We know that most of these sexual abuse crimes happen within family units, within somebody that the child knows. But we also are seeing a huge uptick in online exploitation, particularly with CSAM, child sexual abuse material, which could include videos and photographs of them. And they're being coerced online onto platforms that were never designed for them. They're not safe for them. The adult content that is so prevalent on them is, being exposed to our children. And so we really have to question why that is, what's being done about it, and are the safety controls really adequate to protect them?
What is this landscape of sex trafficking online looking like? Can you give me an example of that? It's a suburban young girl who lives in a normal home with a mom and dad, and somehow she goes from, a fun life of ballet to doing what in the afternoons, and how is this even happening?
Right. So a lot of parents don't realize a child can be trafficked from their own bedroom without ever coming into physical contact with the perpetrator. And these predators know how to target kids. I mean, they know how this whole process works. They know the vulnerabilities. They know how to create fake profiles. They know how to sextort them, their images, all of those things. So when it crosses the realm of sextortion, so we're seeing a lot more of child-generated CSAM, where they're sending each other nude photographs or videos and sharing this explicit content. The problem is, once that's online, it's pretty much always there. You cannot guarantee that it could ever be taken down. And then that crosses over when a child thinks they're talking to a peer. It might not be a peer, and likely many times it's not. And they know how to capitalize on those vulnerabilities. They know how to create a profile that and take time. And in the case that I was telling you about, this 12-year-old girl, they took a year to groom her, to make her feel comfortable, to meet her needs, to be the one who says, your parents are so lame. They just don't understand you. You just need to explore with your gender identity. You need to go meet these adults online. You come to our group. We accept you. We love you. So they fill the need, the emotional need that a kid is needing at that point. And it might be, a physical need too. It might be they need money, or they want to, the new shoes. So they find the need by grooming this child. And all they need is one photo, one video. And then they say, we can expose you. We'll put it out. We'll send it to your cheerleading team. You'll get kicked out of school. Your parents, we'll send it to them. And there's so much shame there. We've seen a lot of sad cases of suicide. In the case that I was telling you about, this girl was suicidal, and her parents recognized these mental health issues, intervened, and the bottom of it was that she was being sex trafficked by an adult male who recruited her online, lured her over a year period of time till she trusted this person and sent one image, and then it escalated from there. Well, I won't post it if you send me a video. And it just kept going and kept going. And, he was profiting off that. And that's really where it crosses the threshold of sexual exploitation, the chain exchange of images, where at some period, somebody's profiting somewhere online. But then when you can prove that somebody's profiting it and they're solely doing it for that purpose, that's when it becomes sex trafficking.
What's crazy about this story is that I think when parents consider who their kids are talking to, if they're talking to another kid, they seem to think that it's not a big deal. And so the story you told me about, the young girl thought that she was talking to another young boy, and she thought he was her boyfriend, but it wasn't really a boyfriend. It was actually an adult. And so the predators are actually using avatars to pretend that there's something that they're not. And then they trap these young girls with these pictures, nude pictures, I'm assuming, which they'll then threaten them and say, if you don't share more pictures with me, I will share this particular picture with everybody you know. And before you know it, they're being trafficked mostly digitally, right?
Or it could be something that, you share in confidence with a friend, maybe a secret, maybe something that is very private. And they say, I'm going to tell somebody that secret if you don't send me an image. And send me that one image, then, they know how to manipulate kids and even adults this happens to, but definitely kids with their undeveloped minds and senses of identity.
How do the schools play into this factor? I know that you had a moment of truth with the school that you sent your kids to, and ultimately you decided to pull your kids out of that school. That must have been just so incredibly difficult. Just tell me a little bit about that experience.
When my husband came out, supporting Donald Trump, our family was essentially canceled before cancel culture was a thing. And sadly, my oldest daughter was bullied at school, was called a racist, was called all sorts of names. And she was so young, she didn't know how to defend herself. She didn't know what to do with all this. So she was really angry at us. Like, if you just wouldn't go and support, stand up for your values, Mom, I wouldn't be getting bullied. If you would just get me social media, I wouldn't be teased by the other kids. It's your fault, and it causes this fraction, this division in the home. And that's exactly what this whole thing is, intended to do. And so I made the decision. I want to show her that our values do matter, and it does require risks and sacrifices. And if that means we take you out of this environment where you're not thriving, then that's what we have to do. And it was a really difficult decision, but now she is thriving. Now she is in a great situation where we don't have to worry about grooming and the indoctrination and all those things. But yeah,
so hard.
It is. So hard. It's hard being a parent.
I think so many of us have had this moment, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, whether it was either, the bullying over politics or, the lockdowns or the vaccines or, in many cases, just the real sexualization of our children and the fact that the schools have become breeding grounds for so many of these dangerous things. I think most parents have realized that something is going on, and it's really an awakening that parents are starting to see. I think while we may have not hit rock bottom yet, more and more parents are starting to wake up. For me, a lot of it has been the sexualization of kids. I'm just so worried about that because you're one of those people who are fighting upstream, and you're seeing that ultimately if we don't stop this sexualization at an early age, downstream we're going to deal with a nation with more pedophiles, a nation with more women who are willing to sell their bodies and fall into this extortion trap. And so tell me a little bit more about the research that you're doing about specific school curriculum when it comes to sexualization. I know it's become a big part of the work that you guys are doing.
Right. So we examine all of the grooming that's taking place, whether it's the pornography in the libraries or at schools. And so we're seeing definitely an increase in that, but it's also in the communities with these all ages drag shows. And the commonality here is the destruction of children's innocence. And you'll notice that, these people defend it saying, well, kids have to be exposed. These are real things in the real world. They need sex ed and all of this. And it's a false narrative. Children should have a childhood free from grooming and exploitation of any kind. And they are trying to desensitize us to this idea that that is worth preserving, because ultimately this is a neo-Marxist, ideal of destroying childhood innocence. Because if they can do that, that fractures the nuclear family. And there's no purpose to protect children then. The entity of motherhood and fatherhood and children, that parent-child bond, once it's severed, there is no family. There is no resistance to any of the authoritarian schemes.
Right, and then the government can come in and just simply control
Right.
everything. A lot of people think that this is a conspiracy theory. Is there a big group behind it with a specific motive? Or is this just a culture that has gone bad and gone out of hand? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's many nefarious interests that benefit from a hypersexualized society, deconstructed families, deconstructed identities of children. But ultimately, they're all authoritarians. Ultimately, they just want to remove our rights as parents, our rights as individuals, and somebody else gets that power. It's just power transfer. So I think that not to be fixated on who's doing it, but really where it's happening in our communities and how we can make a difference from the inside of our homes out into our community. So that is what I think that has been the most empowering for me as a parent and educating other parents, is when we notice things happening in our schools, it is our responsibility, not the politicians, not anybody else's, to get that stuff out of the schools, whatever that means. And that's hard because we're seeing a divide in parents. We're seeing some that are, done with this stuff, and they see what's happening. They see the effect it's having on children, and they're stepping into this warrior mentality of this is enough. And then there's another group of parents that they see it, but they're just afraid. And they're afraid that their kid will be mad at them. They're afraid that they'll ruffle feathers, and they're just, stagnant in this place. They can't confront what's happening. And so I really, I always try to encourage parents that, what's the point of having our values and morals if we cannot live them out? Are we really trying to tell our children to be people of integrity and to stand up for what's right when we won't show them ourselves how we stand up, even when there's risks involved, even when there's sacrifices involved? Then are we just really virtue signaling the same way the left does?
Yeah. I feel like so many parents feel like they're being gaslit too, where they don't know what to look for. Something seems off. And then when they ask whether something is off, they say, well, you're imagining.
Right.
What are things that you have seen in the schools that should trigger some sort of concern in parents?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is no excuse for sexual, sensational type of content. I mean, definitely prepubescent. But in the context of sex ed.
As in like sex ed?
No, and sex ed being taught traditionally over, the age of puberty, not when they're in kindergarten, but now we're seeing masturbation lessons in kindergarten. We're seeing sexual pleasure-based comprehensive sex ed. So that's not sex ed. That is a pleasure-based. And what is pleasure-based? It's sexualizing children. When you are giving adults, whether they're teachers or strangers, permission to talk to your kid about their sexual pleasure, that is sexual grooming. But we're being desensitized, and we're not recognizing that that's exactly what it is. We're being punished. You get kicked off Twitter if you call the teachers groomers that are doing it, if you hold them accountable. And that's what we're seeing. So why are we being shut down for saying the truth of what's happening in these schools? Giving a child a graphic novel depicting sex act, or a tutorial, or a QR code to go onto an adult website. They are actively sexualizing our kids. It's very difficult to just accept that that is the reality. We are not being conspiracy theorists. We're not exaggerating the truth. It's just a difficult truth.
I also noticed that social emotional learning, SEL, has been kind of an excuse or a gateway for a lot of this kind of curriculum. Have you experienced the same thing?
SEL is just a Trojan horse to get all the other things in. And I think that's where I was deceived as a parent of this whole idea of anti-bullying and tolerance and inclusivity. I mean, that's just, these words sound so nice. And then you uncover, the agendas. And one thing that they do with SEL, which is a form of grooming in itself, is these little traumatic stories, right? Where, they might be, there might be a death, a very graphic death. There might be a book, depicting abuse, physical, really torture type abuse, things like that, or abandonment, and you have to ask yourselves, why is this literature, why is this being injected into their minds? What educational positive outcome, results in exposing them to this? What is the purpose of this? And it's really resulting in creating little micro traumas, to affect that childhood innocence dynamics. This is not just sexuality. That's the easy pushed. But where they can't get that done, in some of those more conservative areas where the parents are really paying attention, where it wouldn't fly, that's where I think, with the SEL, they get what they can get through done. And it's a progressive process.
They kind of want to have them tackle issues that adults really should tackle.
Right.
And then have them deal with that, but they're still children and they're still supposed to be innocent, but they don't want them to be innocent anymore. So what would you suggest to a parent who does send their kids to a school where they're starting to notice some of these things? I mean, you went through the experience of pulling your kids out of school. You know it's not that easy. There's, I guess, some would say some trauma in that as well.
Life is not easy. We have difficult choices to make. Parenting today is not easy. I'm not sure it ever will be. But the only way we're going to, combat this war on children is by becoming warriors. And I think that we have some decisions to make as to what environments we allow our children to be exposed to, whether that's social media, influencers, type of people that they're going to be exposed to, music, shows, education. The teachers, who are they? What kind of people are they? They're spending up to 8 hours there a day. I think we have some serious decisions to make, and I think we need a real strategy as opposed to just trying to fix little things at a time, which I think is good if you have the fortitude to do it. If you're willing to go do the work, do the work. But sadly, there's so many who aren't. And I think that parents have to, have that decision and for their own families of if they're not willing to do the work, then what do? Do you continue sending your child into an environment where there's grooming and exploitation and gender indoctrination and play along with the lies? I mean, what message are we sending our kids then?
You have a 14-year-old girl. I'm sure she'd love to be on social media. Are you not letting her go on social?
No, I will not allow her on social media. Because not just what I do, but the outcomes. I mean, when a parent has true informed consent over what that decision entails, I see less and less parents agreeing to it at that point. But the problem is there's a disconnect. There's a lack of education. There's an illusion of parental safety controls helping parents, right? There's no incentive for big tech or requirement for them to be implementing accurate safety mechanisms for our children. This is our responsibility. And so we've been lied to. We've been lied to by the big tech lobby, the industry. We've been lied to even by organizations that claim to help protect kids online. They're supposed to help reduce trafficking. They're not telling them the truth about what happens on these platforms, about what grooming looks like on these platforms, about how kids who are struggling with gender identity are actually at an increased rate of being vulnerable to exploitation because they're suffering from mental health issues at the same time. That makes them more vulnerable. So there's just very few people telling the truth. And I think when parents have the whole story, they look at all of the risks, no parent would willingly then say, sure, I would like to expose my 12-year-old to pornography, OnlyFans girls, predators, and just see what happens because I don't want them to feel left out. So I think that we can do better as parents. And it's hard. Again, parenting is hard. This idea that it's not okay for our kids to be mad at us, then we're not doing a good job as being parents.
I try to say to my kids no every single day. It's like a vitamin N. Yeah.
No.
I think it's easier for me to say I'm not going to let my kids go on social media because they're under the age of 10. But you have a 14-year-old, and I'm sure many of the people who are listening on this conversation do have teenagers and really battle with this idea of how do they make their child be that weirdo that is not on social media. And I totally understand this idea that it's super dangerous and they need to be aware of it. But they'll probably say, well, I put parental control. I make sure they only speak to their friends. They only speak to other young kids. I mean, what's your feedback on that? Can you let your kids go on social media and have the parental control systems on?
Allowing kids on social media is 10 times more harmful than any positive that could be gleaned from that experience. But I will say that it's not just social media. It's what is being replaced. Their real childhood, their physical experiences, going roller skating, being outside, all of those things are being robbed from them for this digital world that they really can't tell the difference. If we're trying to raise warrior children that know how to engage and interact with the world, not be afraid of it, right? But know how to deal with it, then we have to give them some kind of foundation. And allowing it to groom them to accommodate, big tech is really a misstep in my opinion and renders them more at risk. Now with my 14-year-old, I mean, I have a 9-year-old too. It's not a no tech policy. You know, my 9-year-old builds websites, and we do give them access to computer. There's just things you can do. And we have a lot of resources on freedomforever.us of ways that we can engage our kids with tech and sort of test pilot things with them so that it's not just a, no, you can't have it, you can't know anything about it. But I want to show you what they do. I will show my 14-year-old daughter how the algorithms to me look different than to my husband. You know, how they send bikini pictures to men. Right. But to women, they send beauty things to make us feel like we're not enough, you know, and try to sell us things like that. So they need to understand that before they're sent into the lion's den, you know, hoping that they survive there. They need the digital self-defense skills. They need to understand how it all works before we just let them, you know, have that access.
What's the website again?
freedomforever.us.
So Freedom Forever. And then you also have some advice on other plugins that people can use for their kids. What are those? And can you explain them to me?
Right. So, I mean, for parents who are going to make the choice to give them access to some things, right, whether it be YouTube or whatnot, you know, there's really great partners that we have, like Protect Young Eyes, Gab phones as an alternative, Bark, ways that can empower parents and really get into the weeds of exactly what you need to do to protect your home from the inside out and all your children's devices. Because it looks different for every age. And in your home, you know, we have a shared space for the device so that we can watch YouTube videos together. But there's a difference between watching YouTube videos as a family and having your kid have a device unrestricted on YouTube up in their room. That's a completely different dynamic. So it's ways and tools to engage tech, protect your routers, all of those things.
The first instinct of a mother in particular is to defend her children. Right, we have the idea of the mama bear, but it just seems like the mama bears are dormant for some reason. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, but they would almost rather be cool. It's more important for them to be cool or to be relatable than necessarily to be protective. And I think in many ways, this is why we're seeing this exploitation of our children, because there's evil that is taking advantage of the fact that the parents are just simply too weak right now.
Right.
And so what can we do to tell parents that this is their time, this is our time to just step in and step up? Because if we lose this country, if we lose the future of our children, right, then there is no turning back. I don't know how you fix complete chaos. And it just seems like we're headed into complete chaos, and the targeting of our children is so dangerous that I just want parents to remember that we're parents. Right. We have a responsibility to protect these children, even when it doesn't seem cool and even when it's so hard. That's what it means to be a parent.
Right, absolutely. And I think looking into the future too, if we leave our kids in certain environments, is it really going to be shocking when they turn out with the same ideals that are taught in that environment? If we give our kids access to social media, is it really going to be shocking if they sign up for OnlyFans when they're 18? I mean, there's an end product for that grooming, for that indoctrination that we have to be able to think about. I think it's important too to have a plan. We have the Parenting Revolution manual coming out to equip parents with actual, you know, a breakdown of like, okay, here's where we start. Here's these issues. Here's the tools you can use to give them a strategy, because sometimes it's just hard to take that first step and know where to begin. But the warrior mentality that we're trying to inspire in parents is we've abdicated our role as parents for far too long. Now what's happening is a mass transfer of power from parents to the state. And in California, you know, you're seeing they're doing these health centers, and they're trying to get them in all the schools where
health centers, how to make you unhealthy, actually.
Yeah, and where you can get, you know, your child can get a pelvic exam without you knowing about it, or hormones. I mean, and then what happens when they pass laws where they can take your child away if you refuse to affirm them? And these are very difficult, real realities happening across America. So what we have to do as parents is have a strategy, because what happens if your child becomes gender dysphoric as a product of being exposed to these things or just trying to fit in, right? What if that's what it means to fit in now? Not just having social media, but you got to have pronouns in your bio. You got to identify as something other than what you are. Are we going to go along with it? Where's the line? We all have to write that line down so we don't forget where it is.
Right. The line is, when do you actually wake up and are willing to do something and not rely on other people to do things for you? I mean, I think now is that moment. In some ways, I'm actually quite optimistic, because I think that the moment you start attacking our children is the moment that we wake up. And I hope that that is the moment that people are aware of the fact that our kids are under attack. You know, really, advice number one to parents, if you don't like what you're seeing at the school, I guarantee you're not the only parent. And so you got to lock arm with other parents and fight for, you know, the health of your child, right? The space that you're sending your child to every single day. Lock arms with them and really ask to have the meetings in a town hall space so that you're not fighting alone, because they're going to try to divide and conquer and make sure that, you know, you're not all organized. And then once you are organized, it's really important that things are recorded and you actually have specific action items and you're not just being heard, because that's the second step. And so step number one is the administrator would say, oh, let's meet alone so I can listen to you. And they'll show up with a notepad like this and they'll take a bunch of notes and they'll pretend to be listening, or maybe they will be listening, but they'll likely do very little about it, and they'll slow play, but they're not actually doing something. And so organize. Next thing is have a clear understanding of what you want to get out of this town hall and demand deadlines. If you can't actually give me a deadline by when I can see the change, give me the deadline by when you will tell me that you're going to implement some of the change. And I think those two elements are so significant. You can't fight alone. You gotta do it in a town hall experience. You gotta lock arms with other parents, because that's what they're gonna try to do. That's what you guys are doing. You're trying to organize the parents. It's what we're trying to do here at PragerU, is just get parents to understand that they're not fighting this alone. We've been gaslit for far too long. We also need to understand what it is that we want our kids to learn. It's not only what we don't want them to learn, but what are our expectations as parents, right? If I'm sending my kids to you for 8 hours every single day, you know that I'm going to have expectations out of this place. And it's not going to be this vague social emotional thing with a continuous change in curriculum based on whatever the social media mob is requesting at that point in time. And so I think so many of these things are just crucial that parents can wake up. And I mean, we're fighting against so much evil between, you know, the bigger scope of what's happening in our culture and the teacher unions. The teacher unions who are not advocating for teachers. When I was a teacher, they didn't advocate for me. They're not advocating for kids. I mean, you can hear the head of the teacher union speak about how they actually don't care what the kids want, right? And so it's not for the teachers, it's not for the kids, certainly not for the parents. And so what's left? The bureaucrats and the politicians. And so, but there are a lot more parents out there than teacher union members. It's just the parents need to wake up and be aware of the fact that we need to prioritize our kids.
You're so right. And it requires activism. It doesn't require merely sending a letter saying, I'm appalled, this is, you know, inappropriate. You have to have an action plan. And you also have to ask very specific questions. If you're thinking about sending your kid to a private school, don't assume, oh, it's a private school or it's religious. That's not going to have any of the garbage. Problem solved. You have to ask specific questions. Like, do you believe you could be racist against a white person? If they can't answer that question, that's how you know if there's CRT there or not. Those specific pointed questions requiring them to admit what their values are and how they look, not just saying, no, we don't have CRT. Because that's, you know, how they gaslight. They say, oh, we don't do SEL, we don't do CRT, or we believe everybody's, you know, equal. We just strive to have, you know, this typical canned responses.
We're so tolerant.
Yes, exactly. We value everyone's opinion. You know, you have to really get down to the meat and potatoes of how do you handle this situation?
There's something incredible that you told me earlier. It's actually quite frightening, and we both notice this in our work for, you know, advocacy and awareness of what's happening in the schools. And that is that we're seeing actual schools that are in conservative districts being targeted with this hypersexualized education. I gave the example of the Conejo Valley and Simi Valley in California. I know that this is also happening in many schools in Nashville. We've both spoken about what is happening in Salt Lake City, Utah. Why are they targeting conservative schools with this ideology? And how's it even happening? If the majority of the parents are conservative, why are the kids being fed a steady diet of garbage in these schools?
So Tennessee, Ruby Red State, right? All across Tennessee, we have all ages drag shows popping up in virtually a couple months, every deep red pocket. And I started noticing a pattern. And then, you know, we saw them across red states, but I was really interested in why they were focusing on this very conservative Bible Belt area with these all ages drag shows, which many of them have this explicit adult content in front of children. And I started realizing, well, conservative values, conservative families are the last tight pockets of conservatism and family values, protecting child's innocence. So they really need to focus on those things if the intention is to destabilize children's identities with the gender theory and dismantle the nuclear family. They have to target those strongest areas where the most resistance would happen. And one thing that was surprising to me and a little disheartening to see is that how quickly they became desensitized. Like at the very beginning, they're like, oh my gosh, all ages drag shows. We can all, recognize that drag is an adult performance art or whatever you want to call it, but it's definitely not appropriate for kids. Everybody was outraged, right? But nobody wanted to show up. Nobody wanted to protest. Nobody wanted to call the mayor and petition city leaders and everybody to mobilizing what we had to get done. And then it would require more and more explicit videos, and the window, would move of what they would react to. And so now if I just post another all-age drag show, people are like, oh, that's normal, another all-age drag show. And that's how we get here to that next phase of desensitization. So what is the next part of this? What is now going to be considered appropriate 3 months from now, 6 months from now, if we don't stand up now at this line of saying, no, this is an adult, subject matter, performance. We can't expose children to this. And it's hard because you can't have, legislative solutions for everything. But when it comes to child mutilation and child sexual, abuse and grooming, we have to have laws at this point to safeguard these pockets because they're being targeted intentionally.
I mean, and parents need to get involved in the schools and get on the school boards and really make sure that the schools reflect their values.
At every level. I mean, school board, mayors, every aspect of, civic engagement. But as a result, the pocket of parents that we're able to organize and other advocates as well, I mean, we have now legislation being introduced first thing in January to ban child mutilation in the state of Tennessee, to ban all-age drag shows where kids are present, especially in places where the bars, where there's alcohol served and things like of adult nature. So when we come together, it is powerful. It works. I mean, the left does this very well. It's hard to admit when people do things well, but we have to learn from people that we don't agree with what they do well and adopt those same strategies and tactics. That there really is a utility in protest. There is a utility in coming together and flooding somebody's phone line and saying, we will not accept no for an answer. So it does pay off in the end to just be diligent and not stop.
Well, I'm committed and I'm fired up and I'm really excited about the work that you are doing. And so I think we're only getting started, and hopefully people who are watching us are going to join us, and we're not going to be doing this alone. Let's save our children.
Let's do it.